everyone, to week 2 of Workshop Wednesday. My name is Mike Leitzke, and I'm your host for Workshop Wednesday. And I'm so excited to welcome our guests here today to talk about collaboration, workflow, and design, and anything else that may come up along the way. Before we get started, I want to go ahead and thank the the indoor circuits that present the series of Workshop Wednesday. So that's the Carolina Winter Ensemble Association, the SCGC, and ADLA out in Cali. Thanks to the Cali folks for jumping on. I know it's a little bit early for you guys out there, but definitely appreciate it. So tonight, I am so excited to be joined by two guys that live here in the Middle Tennessee area. Matt's a little bit further away from us now, but a Middle Tennessee native, and super pumped to talk with them. So we have with us Shane Gwaltney and Matt Jordan. How are you guys doing?
What's up, man? How you doing?
Oh man, doing well. You know, just another day living the dream here in the COVID world of working all day in this office and jumping on here and talking to you guys. So yeah, excited to get into it.
Yep. I sat in this chair for at least 10 hours today already. So it's just more of the same. It's awesome.
Very well worn in at this point.
Yeah, it is. Need a new one.
Cool. Well, I feel like most people that are on here are probably familiar with you guys, but let's just, for the sake of making sure everyone's on the same page, let's just give a little bit of a brief background about each one of you. So Shane, we'll go ahead and start with you.
Sure. My name's Shane Gwaltney. Been in the marching activity for a good bit. I was a founding member of City Mystique and have kind of been there ever since. I've done some drum corps in the past, Southwind, Spirit, Phantom Regiment, and I own Synced Up Designs, and yeah, just try to be involved with as much stuff as I possibly can, and teach a local high school group here in town to kind of keep me engaged with what the youth is up to nowadays. And yeah, it's fun. I enjoy life, and it's been good.
Awesome. And you're a board member of SCGC, and you're also the program coordinator for Music City Drum Corps. Is that correct?
That's correct. Yeah. So sorry, man, we totally didn't have a summer, so it was one of those things on my mind. But yes, I'm a board member for the circuit here at SCGC, which is really awesome because I grew up in it, and it's been just really an awesome opportunity to be able to kind of be a part of those meetings and help kind of give back and help Mike bring some awesome direction to kind of what he's already got established. And it's just been awesome. The drum corps has been one of the funnest projects that I've done in a long time, just for the fact that it's been here for a while. I've seen it grow, and just for me to be able to actually kind of be a part of the group now when they're really, starting to get their legs underneath them. And it's just a great opportunity, and I'm really excited with working with them.
Yeah, that's awesome. A lot of great people involved with Music City Drum Corps.
Oh, yeah, it's awesome.
It's been really great to see Joe Roach come on as the executive director, and now he's got you on board, and the team that you guys are putting together seems like you're going to be ready to do some really great things. So fingers crossed that we have a season and you guys get to put something out there. I know I've got a couple of students that were supposed to be in the corps last year, and pumped for them to get to be able to do the drum corps experience with whatever that might look like in 2021.
Yeah, for sure. Being creative and innovative is what it's going to look like.
Yeah, for sure.
Yeah.
So speaking of creative and innovative, let's go to guest number 2 tonight, the one and only Matt Jordan.
All right. Yeah. So just a little background. Yeah, absolutely. So my background, so I'm from the Nashville area. Currently, I'm the assistant professor of percussion at Jacksonville State University here in Jacksonville, Alabama. I'm also the music coordinator and sound designer for the Bluecoats Drum and Bugle Corps. I'm one of the music arrangers, one of 3 for Music City Mystique. I kind of primarily focus around the front ensemble, but we kind of all do a little bit of everything, along with Shane and our good friend Matt Filosa. Then I also am a music advisor for the Colts within that. So that's kind of my marching kind of active roles. I do some front ensemble arranging for some high schools as well, for the fall season as well. I think the big thing is that my background really comes from more concert percussion side of things. So when I was living in Nashville, I was playing regularly with like the Nashville Symphony. I was doing lots of kind of contemporary music gigs. I really come more from a playing background, and just happened to be involved in the drum corps and WGI community. So a lot of my training is kind of split a little bit. I did drum corps with Cavaliers, and I was a member at City Mystique for 6 years. But at the same time, I was going to kind of orchestral institutes in the summer and, the Stevens Marimba Seminar. So I was kind of splitting my training in two different directions within that. So that's kind of a very, very short version of my background on that.
Yeah, that's great. And Dr. Jordan recently, I believe.
Yep. Yeah. So a year and a half ago, I guess, no, maybe 2.5 years ago now, I finished my doctorate from Florida State. I had been pretty much ABD, which is all but the dissertation. I had been done with that since about 2011. So it really was just about 6.5 years later, I finally did all the papers and recitals and things I needed to finish up within that. So yeah, and that's what enabled me to kind of move into this role here at JSU as well.
Nice. Well, that's awesome. Well, congratulations on that role at JSU. Even though we miss you here in town, you're still not too far away and still come in rather frequently. So
yeah, it's only 3 hours. It's not too bad.
Yeah.
So.
Cool. Well, Matt, you said that you were a member of City Mystique for 6 years. How old were you when you joined Mystique?
So, I'll tell a quick little story about that. So I was 14 my first year of Mystique. So the way that worked is my high school, I went to Martin Luther King High School in Nashville. Funny enough, that's where my wife teaches now, and up in Nashville. And so I was going to a school that didn't have a marching band. And I kind of wanted to be involved with something with marching. I had some friends when I was in Boy Scouts. I had some friends who were in their respective marching bands at their high school. And it sounded like fun. So funny enough, just by chance, and actually there's a picture out there somewhere that of me and Shane when I was 12, accidentally. My family used to take us to a thing in downtown Nashville called Dancing in the District. That every Thursday during the summer, they would have a big barge that would pull up on the riverfront in Nashville and a band would play. But pretty much every Thursday, Street Beats, which is the bucket drumming group that Shane was in, they would be there kind of drumming on the street. And me being somebody who was interested in playing percussion, would just go watch, and go hang out with them, watching for an hour or so, watch them go through their whole set and everything. And so one of the times, and this was like 2 years before I actually ended up being in the group, they were handing out flyers for a group called City Mystique, and it was an indoor drum line. I didn't know what that was. I'd never seen it. So funny enough, I actually never got to watch Mystique as a non-member until I'd marched for 6 years in the group. So the first time I actually saw Mystique was in 2006. After I'd marched for 6 years within that. But yeah, so funny enough, my first year I marched cymbals at Mystique. And the reason I marched cymbals is since I didn't know what I was doing on any instrument really, I went to auditions and just looked at the list. They had a sign-up sheet of who was signing up for snare drum, tenors, bass drum, cymbals, for ensemble. And the cymbal line list only had one person on it. So I said, you know what, if I sign up for this, I might have a chance. And so seriously, the reason I ended up making Mystique is because, I signed up for the section that had the least people signed up for it at the time. It worked out well. So.
And here you are all those years later.
Yeah, but no, I marched 6 years with the group, but didn't even march my last 3 years of the group. I could have marched 9 years total. So.
Man, that's crazy. You, Rob, and Craig, and Hunter, and all those people just marched so many years, and it's crazy.
That's a group of people that doesn't exist anymore. Like there's not really. We don't have super vets that last longer than 4 years really now, just because it's kind of hard to make the group under 18 years old. We have little kind of child phenoms that do occasionally, but usually they don't end up marching for 7 years or anything like that. So
yeah. Now, conversely, Shane, were you day one, year one at Mystique?
Yeah, probably even before day one. Like Don had basically we were in college. It was my freshman year at MTSU, and we had heard through the grapevine, Alan Rice, actually at Forks Drum Closet still. He said, hey, there's because Lalo would send us there to go pick up sticks, right? So we're running down there. And we go pick up sticks, and then Al was like, hey, there's this drumline thing that's going to be happening, and blah, blah, blah. We're like, okay, it sounds fun, whatever. And then and then we got a hold of a couple of people. Alan gave us directions to where Don was. We went over there, auditioned for him on like a Monday or Tuesday night in his kitchen, because we had a football game that day or that weekend coming up, whenever it would be. So we couldn't make it. So there ended up being like 3 or 4 college people in that first group, and the rest of it was kind of high school kids. And then, it evened out a little bit after that. But yeah, I mean, it was day one, year one, kind of whatever it is. And I marched for 5 years. And during those years, I was fortunate to the mentors that were writing for me at the time, or not me, but Mystique and stuff at the time, gave me opportunities to write while I was a member. And the group was young enough at the time that they probably could afford that liability, probably. But it inspired me to keep doing what I'm doing now, just because of the opportunities that were given to me at the time, for sure.
Yeah, that's really interesting that you say that about you writing as a member or being a part of the design process, at least tangentially, as a member. That's very similar to Rhythm X. When Andrew Markworth was still in the group, and I think maybe to a slightly lesser extent when Tim Jackson was in the group. I think he was writing some of the beats.
Let me rephrase it. I was like writing the snare lick, like the snare solo. I wasn't like writing any phrases or anything. Like, it was like, it'd be like, hey, what can you do? And it's like, well, let's just do this. I'm sure after they got tired of me asking so many damn times about it, I was like, sure, let them write something, and
sure, whatever.
For sure. Yeah. But it was, I mean, I think 97, 98, 99. Even in 99, I did some drill stuff before we aged out, because we had some issues with our drill writer at the time. And I was fortunate enough to do like the last 20 seconds of our show visually, before I aged out. So it was, opportunities presents itself, and I'm the kind of guy that will stick my neck out and make it cut or whatever, but I'm going to, it's going to be me. I'm going to try it, why not?
Yeah.
So.
Yeah, that's awesome. I mean, just like the kind of like the homegrown nature of it, I think is really cool to the whole Mystique story, and how like the talent was really cultivated here in the Nashville area. I mean, before everything blew up and you guys had members driving, 8 to 10 hours every single weekend to be there in the group. It's just really cool to see like what effect that had on the community. And now when you have a lot of alumni that are teaching other places, just kind of how that trickles down across the entirety of the area. And then, you look at like what the Schletzers did with Father Ryan and, Julie with Overton, and, just a lot of really great groups. Jason with, Mount Juliet, and then where we see at Page before that.
Mm-hmm.
Where they were.
Yeah,
I mean, just really, really great groups, and that all comes from that same group of people that you guys marched together with. Well, so I just think it's really cool. So you took over the reins writing in what year?
Oh man. 02, 01, I did the visual program. There's been 3 battery arrangers. Chris Finnan was first, and then Patrick Sievers was second for a couple of years.
Mm-hmm.
And then 2001, I think, was the last year they did that. And then I did the visual program as a gladiator year.
Mm-hmm.
That was the first time I kind of I aged out in 99, and then that's kind of what I started doing with that. And then in 02, that's when I started doing the battery and the visual.
Okay. Yeah. And then Matt, your last year performing in the group was 2004 or 2005?
2005. So I did 2005, and funny enough, this isn't really something that would generally happen now, but I had been away from the group for a while. By the point my age out was 08. But I actually at that point was about to go off to grad school at North Texas. And there was like a few weeks gap where like no staff members in 08 could actually be like with the group. So Eric just called and said, hey, just shut up to everybody, because nobody knows when you aged out or didn't age out. So do you have a few weekends where you could come help? And so I actually taught my age out a little bit for a few weeks at Mystique. So I was on staff for 08, and then I was gone for 4 years because I was in grad school in other states and things like that. And then 2013 is when I came back, and I kind of took over as like the audio kind of engineer at first. I really wasn't able to teach much just because of my schedule with MTSU, and I was starting at Pearl at the time. I was pretty busy with all that stuff. So really I was kind of switching the group over from like analog hardware synths over to main stage and a digital mixer and kind of new sound system. So that was my kind of primary role in 2013. And then I took over from Eric Johnson in 2014. within that, and I've been there ever since. So yeah, it's similar on the front ensemble end. There's been 3 front ensemble rangers. It's been Don, Click, and everyone front ensemble wise has been pretty evenly spaced out. Where Shane kind of, he's been there for 20 years himself, at this point, or 18 years or 19 years, something like that, from a battery standpoint, arranging wise. And so I think Don did 10 years, Eric did 11 years, and now I've done 7 years within that. So it's relatively even spaced out for the front ensemble people.
Yeah.
And I've written with all 3 of them. So it's been awesome.
So.
Shane is the one that can tell all the stories.
He definitely has a lot of them. Yeah.
Probably not on here, but yes, that is very correct.
Yeah, that'll be the after hours workshop.
Totally, yeah. Exactly.
So, all right, Shane, let's travel through time a little bit. Let's go back to, was Eric's first year 02 or 03 working with you? Maybe 04.
03. It was 03.
Okay.
Yeah, 03 was his first year.
So back then, it sounds like it was primarily Don, you, Josh may have been involved with the design process.
No, he was still marching.
Oh, wow. Okay.
Yeah, Josh aged out, was it in 03, right?
03, yeah. So Josh's first year on staff was 04, yeah.
For those who may not know, Josh Nelson is the current director of Music City Mystique.
Correct, yeah.
Yeah.
And he marched 5 years also, I think, right? Or 4?
No, he just marched 4 years. 2000
yeah,
to
he just marched 4 years. He's so beneath us.
No,
for sure.
It was 2000 through 03 was when he marched.
Yeah. That's right.
All right. So what was your guys' design process like back then?
Oof. It was fun. It was good. It was I learned a lot. Don was the program coordinator then, and he would do he's very big on thematic stuff. So our personality as a group really hasn't changed since the beginning, other than just being higher level and more produced. But our by any means necessary attitude, and then just trying to be theatrical and try to be bigger than the gym, has been that way since day one, and that's a Don and Chris and Patrick and all those guys. So, but yeah, so learn from them and just being able to kind of talk with Don. And, one of the cool things that, we would do is we would make sets, cardboard fun sets out of, what we wanted to build. So we kind of see it.
Like dioramas?
Yeah, kind of. Yeah. And, and we still do that occasionally. I've got one here that I use for marching band stuff,
okay.
You know what I'm saying? That I can build props with and kind of do some sets 3D before I do it. So yeah, definitely did that. And, or we would pick a cool soundtrack or a movie like Gladiator that we could, really kind of capitalize on the already built-in emotion with it. And yeah, they would write. Typically back then we would pick out source material, and which is big different than kind of what it is now, but then we would pick out the music and the source material that we would do, and then we would kind of play it down. We would kind of orchestrate some effects here and there, but it wasn't, we were expecting the music to do it for us as we wrote it, right, versus us creating it. And so I think that's the biggest difference then kind of what it is now, as far as how we program things. Because back then, like I said, it was just, we've got this tune, we're going to play it, we're going to put a break in here for a drum thing, and then we're going to keep on as is, like a Pat Metheny tune or something like that.
Yeah.
And I'm not saying we didn't get creative with it. It was just definitely more straight ahead drumming, on some of that stuff.
Well, I think really the whole marching activity was still at that point. Even drum corps was still very much here's the tune, we play that, we finish, there's applause, and you move on. I think that, that really was a part of both DCI and WGI.
Yeah, I totally agree with that. Even taking it back to last week with Brett and Scott, talking about Spin Cycle in 03, which, Matt, I know you were the timpanist in that show. There's still each movement is very clearly ending, applause, then start. And, even for that, which I feel was a little bit more through composed than other shows at the time, still very much that way.
Yep.
Yeah, I think some of the cool things that we did back then, that Don would make click tracks, for us to kind of get an idea about pacing and things like that. And which was, really helpful back then. Of course, we were all writing on paper back then too. So that was interesting for several years, just because it just was. I don't ever want to go back to that. It was not even to talk about it anymore. But we started getting everything digitally done. I'd say probably '04, maybe something like that was kind of when we like started putting.
I just had this right next to me. So there's Eric's original score from 2003.
Oh.
You know, it's kind of scribbles and stuff like that. You know, it was
so
hard
yeah,
to learn any of that stuff. So
yeah, so a lot of things have changed in that regard as far as like the member experience on like what they get and how they view the music and the whole teaching aspect of it. But it's you work with what you're given at the time and you don't know any different, right? And then as things get easier, we can spend more time doing other things versus all that other stuff. So software has helped us develop a lot of things because now we can hear a lot of stuff before we even write it down. Where back then we were just like, let's hear the group playing, get a recording, then go home and talk about it. Just like, oh my God,
get your pencil out and erase all the score.
Yeah, I mean, it's ridiculous, right? So looking back on it, things moved way slower. Now things can we're lickety split with stuff, and like the production quality is like right off the bat, and we know yay or nay, and we can zig or zag immediately with that before it even gets to the members. And I think that's the that was awesome. And I don't know, I would like to go back and do some stuff handwritten at some point, but I'm not begging for it.
No, thank you. My handwriting's terrible. So
you guys are gonna get some arthritis.
Trust me, that's already there with the typing.
Yeah. All right. So that was kind of how you guys operated back then. Contrast that with what you do now. Now, obviously, Matt Filosa is involved with the design process. There's probably, I know you guys are the main three, but there may be other people involved kind of tangentially. So bring me through what you guys do now or how it ordinarily works.
For sure. Like normally we'd have a design meeting in June or something. We'll do like a weekend getaway in the woods or on a lake somewhere by the beach, and we'll probably be there for about 2 or 3 days. And we'll just kind of bring all ideas to the table. Some of us are more passionate about others. A lot of us like, hey, I don't have anything, but I really like what's going on over here. Or somebody might bring 5 ideas. It doesn't matter, but we just try to find the thing that we want to be creative with, and not necessarily we want to create a drumline show. Like what's unique? What kind of effect can we get out of it? What kind of visual theme? And then once we figure out how we want to be big and kind of the mood we want to do, then we start thinking about the music we want to kind of put to it. Like basically how a movie's done. And we want to do a soundtrack afterwards, kind of enhance what those, first visions are. Clearly the visual program gets written after the music, but it's always inspired by what the initial visual ideas are. We've got uniforms, typically a floor to look at, and we've got all these visual elements. So when they start writing the music, like they're already inspired and kind of like it helps them immerse the audience into what people are seeing, right? When it's already there. And so like that's the first thing we do. We find the vision and then we create a timeline, and Matt can kind of show you, he can screen share in a second, kind of show you some stuff with that. But basically we'll create this timeline that's like the first 15 seconds, we want it to be this. We want it to feel like this. We want it to blah, blah, blah. The next, 15 seconds to minute and a half will be the opener. We kind of break it down like that. So before we even put pen to paper, we have this whole spreadsheet in front of us. It kind of like keeps us in the guidelines of the creativity, just so that when they're creating moments, meaning Filosa and Matt, Jordan here, like all these Matts here, or whatever. But as they start writing, and we'll kind of go over that in a second, kind of who does what first. But as they get into it, they have this template that they're already following. We've all already agreed on. Nobody wanders off track too far, what I'm saying? But it gives everybody a really cool parameter to be creative in, with also feeling like they have a destination. Because one thing, we've all done it, we get to writing a phrase, and next thing you know, we're like, dude, this thing is like 30 bars too long. Should not have happened, but you felt like you needed to finish the idea, right?
Yeah.
And next thing you know, you start developing stuff. So when we do this timeline, it allows us to look, hey, I've got 20 seconds here. Maybe this isn't we're not trying to play anything virtuosic. It's just an effect and a mood we're trying to get across. So we'll kind of go through there and then kind of decide what needs to be an effect, or what needs to be like a snare lick, or needs to be a marimba phrase. So we can kind of see all that stuff paced out on paper before pen to paper, right?
Yeah.
Then at that point in time, depending on what moment is first, but typically it's a sound design thing, and we start sketching some stuff out. Filosa will get a hold of that sketch and all the music that we suggested, and he'll put it in Logic and basically sketch out some really cool ideas that we can hear before anybody starts putting stuff in Sibelius or anything like that. And then once we agree on it and we like the pacing of it and everything, the sound design's already done, you know. And then after that, we start adding on the nuts and bolts to it. And it's really cool because when I'm writing the battery, I know which sound design would be behind it, or if we need to cut it out because it's too thick, whatever, at least we have that option, but we're already inspired by what's there. MJ already knows what's there. The sound bed's there. We know how to not get in each other's way. And there's plenty of times where the sound design is just, it's a lot because that's what's the only thing there. And then we go back through and we thin it out as we fill it in with more acoustic stuff, you know. But yeah, ultimately that's where it goes. You know, if we're at a chunk that needs to start with acoustic stuff, or Jordan here's got some things he got to do, he'll take the lead on some things and kind of reorchestrate and kind of like be creative with kind of within the bumpers of what the timeline gives us.
Well, I think that's a really interesting.
Go ahead, Mike.
I think that's a really interesting way for you guys to design your shows, and at least, you know, like set up the harmonic landscape and have the pacing figured out ahead of time. So that way, you know, you already know what's going to happen. You can chop, you already know what you need to do if you have to adapt from there. And, you know, I really hadn't heard much of people designing shows like this until I had a conversation with Matt Hernandez, who writes a front ensemble music at Ayala High School and Strike, and I think a couple of other places as well. But he kind of does a similar thing where he'll kind of score things out in Logic and figure it out from there before he even opens up Sibelius or, you know, whatever notation software he's using. And, you know, I watched him do a clinic on it that was just, I mean, kind of mind-blowing to just see a completely different workflow than anything that I was used to. Because I'm used to, I'll go into Sibelius, and granted, like, I'm not doing a lot of composition. If I'm writing something, I'm going to arrange to something that's already existing. So I already have it in my mind of what it's going to sound like, as opposed to you guys who's doing a lot of original composition. But I'll go in and I'll notate it out, and then I'll do any sort of sound design or fluff work on top of that after the fact. So it was really interesting to see that, and now see you guys do a similar thing.
Yeah,
makes me think you guys are onto something.
Well, yeah, it's efficient. I mean, with the amount of time that we have to spend on things, it's super efficient, because by the time it gets to the members, it's already gone through so many filters that, like, I mean, I can't tell you the last time we rewrote something like wholesale. You know what I'm saying? Like,
yeah, I don't think since I've been there.
Yeah, I mean, it's been
like maybe an ending. Maybe it's like we had like a temporary ending and we rewrote an ending, but really past that, we haven't really had to change much.
I bet a decade. I bet it's been a decade since we've done that. Yeah. We kind of started this process with Mantra, is where it went on, and it was, and that was
Tony Nunez was involved at that point.
What's that?
Okay.
So I said Tony Nunez was involved in that point.
Correct.
So,
yeah, but
Tony was one of the ones that kind of brought that, like, sound design first workflow to
for sure. Well, actually, it was me in my archaic ways of using Logic at the time. I found the basic tracks in there, and I put together this like really ugly sketch of it in Logic, because like, this will sound good. Like, Eric can do this, blah blah blah. And of course, the key changes were all over the place and whatnot, but we got the idea across. And of course, Tony and then Eric, of course, got a hold of it and turned it into just something pretty incredible.
Yeah. And I think the big key is between me and Matt Filosa, like, we were roommates in college. Like there's no people who have, I think, a closer working relationship with this kind of thing than me and Matt. We also don't care about who gets the credit for certain things. Like, there's times where Matt will write a whole front ensemble phrase. There's times I'll write electronic stuff. Like, we really have a very collaborative relationship. And I think the other side to it is that Matt is very much a composer first. Like, Matt comes from that mindset of being able to compose, and he has great ideas. And I come from more the arranging kind of an orchestrating standpoint. So, like, usually the way that works out is that Filosa can be the one who's thinking about the macro and the pacing, and I'm the one who can get in the weeds and kind of worry about what crazy thing the marimbas are playing, and so it works well. We're like trying to figure out what the marimbas are playing while you're also trying to think about pacing is really hard to do well.
Yep, absolutely.
Within that, and so and like Shane was saying, like, there's times where if we're arranging rather than doing original material, I probably will go first, because I'm going to start with that kind of bed that's already there from an arrangement standpoint. So that's kind of how our process has flowed. If it's original, Filosa tends to go first. If it's an arrangement, I tend to go first. Again, just depending on what it is within that. that. So I actually have a few things to kind of going off our conversation so we don't get so far away from it, to kind of show. So let me switch to kind of my screen here. So this is like when we come out of a design meeting, this is an old idea that actually I think Shane and Matt used for a different group, but this was kind of from originally a Mystique kind of pitch a while ago. And so this is Daniel Brown. So Daniel Brown is our visual designer, like a graphic designer who does a lot of the kind of floor designs and props and things like that from a design standpoint within this. So this is the kind of the stuff that he'll show up with like a mood board of when we go to one of those design meetings. So even like stuff like story arc, kind of like showing kind of different arcs of the show, different ideas for music effects. And again, this is just Daniel kind of just brainstorming, but even down to like photoshopping the floor into UD. To kind of good idea of what that looks like, you know, even something like different kinds of props. So really when we come away from that design meeting, we already have a good idea of what it'll look like in Dayton, even if we end up not going with that kind of show. And again, different floor options, all that kind of stuff within there. So that's kind of where we generally start. And then let me pull up that timeline that Shane was talking about. So, and I think this is really important, is that we're kind of writing a movie that doesn't exist yet. So like imagine we're kind of pacing out the movie with this timeline, and then we're creating the music for the movie, and then Shane gets to write the movie after that. But it's one of those weird processes of we don't get to write it in the same order as a normal movie because of how what we do works within that. So really what we're doing here is just making sure we have time to kind of get what we need to done by the end of that 7 minutes, kind of like Shane was mentioning. So it's not that the timeline is a fixed item. It's just that we know if we, you know, rob from one area with time, we have to give it back somewhere else. And so this just really holds us accountable for making sure that we don't write a 9-minute show. Instead, we write a, you know, 6:45 or 7-minute show kind of within that. But you'll see that all the way through this, kind of every section, we have kind of a concept, kind of what we kind of start with, kind of overall overarching, you know, kind of visual, what Shane's thinking with all that, what our primary music focus is, and then also what our primary light focus is. Sometimes there's other, you know, if we have something with props or we have something with something else. But you know, this is kind of what Shane sets up for us. And this is a living, breathing document. So this is something that at the early part of the season, it wouldn't be this filled in, but this is kind of the later season version where we've already kind of adjusted and kind of gotten to the point where this is filled on the back end. Usually it might just be kind of a concept for these last little sections, and it might be like from 4 to 6 is a battery explosion within that. So that's, again, kind of a good little starting point within that. Let me now open up a Logic file, and I'll show you kind of, this is like what originally we'll get. And I don't have every single sound that Filosa has, so this will just give you a good idea of, this is the beginning of our show this past year. In 2020, and this is kind of what I'll get from Filosa. And what you'll notice is it's not finished by any stretch of the imagination. You know, it's really designed as kind of just a sketch within here, something that gives me ideas and kind of triggers some things for me. I don't have my external hard drive plugged in, so there's some definitely going to be some things missing, but you'll get the right idea within this. So you should be able to hear this. Expand all these out so you can see them. So again, this is kind of a very rough sketch. The opening stuff that we knew we were going to play live, but at this point, this was just so a big swell coming up here.
That opening thing they have.
And so you'll notice that there's not much here from a content standpoint, but it's giving us kind of ideas of timbres and textures here. So you'll hear, again, like if we were to put that on the floor, we'd get last, you know, like as it stands right there. This is really just a sketch and just an idea to kind of get started with. And so let me kind of open up the Sibelius file, and you'll kind of see what we then take that and do to it to make this work. Again, and that's Philosa's entire idea, is to give me seeds of ideas for me to take and develop within this. Because like the pacing of this is very different than what we ended up having, but that was kind of the original sketch kind of within that on there.
I'll jump in here real quick too.
Yeah, absolutely. While I'm loading
the back to the timeline that he was showing up there, those colored blocks on the left-hand side. The reason why that's like that, because what it does is it groups, like he may have like 5 different sections in one thing, but what it does, it allows them to go, hey, everything in the blue needs to sound like this. Everything in the green needs to sound like think of like opener, ballad, closer, or whatever. But it has all those other micro spots in there where we've broken it down even further, right? Just so they know that this section is, you know, it's, yeah, we got to change an idea here thematically and everything else. So that kind of keeps everybody kind of intact. You see like the last little bit's blue because it just changed at the end for just like a quick thing, you know, quick idea there. So
we'll see if Sibelius cooperates. Avid's awful. So
counting down the days to Dorico.
I know, seriously.
Everybody's saying,
yeah, it was kind of acting like it was going to freeze up on me. So we'll see if it works. Not a big deal if it doesn't. I was just gonna kind of show you that part of the score that relates to Philosa's sketch. The score doesn't have the sound design, so you're obviously going to hear it kind of more from an acoustic element standpoint. But hopefully it gives you kind of an idea of how we develop the content, at least.
Right, and to kind of jump in again, it's maybe hard to read on there, but the idea was we wanted to create like the Big Bang, right, in the beginning. So thematically, it was we wanted to kind of hear this like simmering, like this just thing cooking, right? And that's where the gong stuff coming in. So we're hearing that, and all of a sudden it finally goes up. And when it cuts off, that's when the next explosions come in. And that's where the actual snare break, if you remember the show, or maybe he can show you in here. But it went with those isolated hits that you heard in there, kind of whatever those bells were. But in the actual show, that ended up being the cold attack double stop shot snare break. And those when the lights were flashing at the audience and things like that. So we're kind of like emulating like explosions and big bangs and quick bursts and stuff like that with those isolated hits and like sharp sounds in the front ensemble and that kind of thing. The strobe lights are killer, man. I was so upset that it didn't go to the distance with WGI, but man, they're coming back. So
here I'll start at the snare break now because it's all loaded, but I'll start at the snare break, and hopefully you can start to see some of the things that we did harmonically. So Philosa had these kind of little impacts in here, which I kept exactly where they were rhythmically. I just changed some harmonies to make it a little bit more interesting, a little bit more kind of spacious with what we wanted. Then we kind of added this whole section at Shane's request, this kind of big a shell thing that kind of happens with the snares. This wasn't in there originally. Really all the way through here to kind of finish the snare break out. And then kind of right at D, we get back into the kind of material that you'll hear from Philosa, just dramatically kind of altered and enhanced and kind of, you know, hacked and slashed into being something similar that uses the same melody, same ideas, but kind of in a different order within here. So here's this section, just acoustics only. Some random synth notes. Those are sample triggers that usually trigger main stage. This is all kind of added material and then back to Philosa's original sketch idea.
And this right here is what led in.
Oh yeah, go ahead, Shane.
Yeah, it's like, and this right here is what kind of led into the silent choreography moment. We wanted to kind of like, basically this is all choreography that went along with the front ensemble that we were doing and kind of like swirling around this idea. And then it went into that big empty space because, hey, we wanted to use silence and do choreography in that silence, right? Eat up like 20 or 30 seconds, have a really cool effect in there. And that's what kind of that trickle off idea was. It kind of gets us to that open space and then just like Then after that, the pulse was coming from the members doing the choreography and things like that. And stuff like that is things that we think about what the effect has got to be, and then they make sure that it's contoured and sets the idea up correctly. Because you can, I mean, we could have had a silent choreography moment, you know, but the setup could have been trash and it wouldn't have been effective, right? So it's really about the setup and how you get out of these ideas when you're designing these things. Like, for instance, at the end of the snare break, MJ, if you want to show that thing, where we had to change the rhythms of the 9lets versus 16th notes or whatever, because we were trying to find the right momentum at the end of the phrase to make it feel like it zips to the end without feeling dull and more of the same, right? So, you know, as part of the pacing, we're like, okay, we got to do the snare thing, and we got to make sure the ensemble at the end is really tight and it's very vertical, you know, and we just played on those last 2 beats there. It took us a little bit to figure out the right rhythm and the right kind of zip to get the ensemble to have that little button at the end of it that makes everything else sound different, and that sound like an exclamation point. Because the one thing that people need to realize when you're creating an effect, it should sound different than the stuff before it and after it, right? Because what creates effect is contrast, right? It doesn't necessarily need to be loud or anything, but if we want people to know that's the end of a phrase, there needs to be some kind of little zinger, right, at the end of it that makes people go, "Oh yeah, I get it. You know, this is where we clap." You know, and the layman understands that. Like, music speaks to everybody, you know, and if it's written correctly and expressed correctly, that's when it elicits a response from the layman, right?
Yeah.
So,
well, and to quickly kind of talk about what Shane was talking about here. So originally what I had written in this kind of made up phrase, kind of in the middle, this transitional phrase between the kind of finality of the snare phrase, was I had originally written this as being so it's still just like 2 bars of 16th notes, just with kind of similar accents to what are there in the 9-lit version. So what Shane's talking about is that we just transitioned into the 9-lit version of it in order to kind of give it that little extra juice right at the end of the phrase. So you can kind of imagine this continuing for another bar, but again with a little more direction similar to the 9-lits. So just changing that into the 9-lits just made it really, really feel like it kind of pushed forward rhythmically. And if you listen to the whole thing, you'll see what I'm talking about. So you just have a little bit more momentum forward, and the keyboards, you know, we lost a little bit of momentum from a keyboard perspective because we couldn't play 9-lits in that same way. We just didn't have the chops to be able to play 9-lits straight hand to hand, so we kind of end up having a little more like a puttada style, but it also allows that kind of triplet to kind of help drive things forward as well. So yeah, you kind of have these trade-offs of the rhythms helped it sound as an ensemble better, but even though keyboards sounded like technically they're playing a little slower from a hand standpoint at the same time. So yeah,
you heard it here, folks. He said the Music City Mystique front ensemble didn't have the chops.
Well, I think to be clear, the 9-lits just don't line up on the right hands. That's the more important thing. So.
Good clarification.
No, that writing for that group's like writing for a Ferrari, man. Like, it's just, you know, it's seriously, they can do anything you ask them to do. It's crazy. Like the number of things that I'll write for them that I know it'll kind of work, but I don't know if they'll be able to play it at tempo. And you know, they send me a video like an hour later, like, how did you learn that fast? Like, I've been working on this for a few days trying to make this hard for you, and you play it in an hour. You know, there's definitely times like that where you think you write something hard for them, and you're like, well, I got to figure out how to write something harder than that then. So.
Well, that's awesome. And it's super cool to see how you guys kind of set up the overall score and, you know, what you guys do from there and your thought process behind pacing and creating contrast between rhythmic or harmonic density and more openness. You know, I think that's one thing that you guys do that kind of creates a unique mystique sound, if you will, you know, where it's like, even if you don't know what your guys' show is, or if you've never heard it before, if you just heard an audio file of you guys playing it, you could kind of realize, okay, that's mystique. That has a mystique sound to it.
Yeah. And I do think that, like, even through the kind of the arranger changes front ensemble wise, you know, I do think we've kind of maintained, even though we all have our own identities, we've all maintained that kind of inherent mystique vibe from a front ensemble standpoint, which does kind of obviously affect the pacing for everything else within there as well. So
yeah, cool. Well, let's talk real quick about just overall programmatic concepts. So, we're thinking early 2000s or even before that with Mystique. I hesitate using the word one dimensional, but it's a gladiator show where you guys look like gladiators. You have really masculine motions that you guys do, and you play, from the Gladiator soundtrack. Contrast that with what you guys have done recently with Soul and with Medium the year prior. How have you guys changed that process, or what is your thought process behind overall programmatic concepts? Do you care if someone can necessarily read, quote unquote, the all of the intricacy and the details of the through line or the arc the first time? Or are you just kind of going for more creating a visceral reaction that's engaging enough to resonate with the viewer, and you utilize that as your art and you use that as an effect standpoint? Or are you really trying to be explicit with telling a story?
I think it's changed over time, and right or wrong, it's just where we are now, and I think creative opportunities have allowed us to do different things. Electronic sound design has allowed us to do different things. The use of lights has allowed, just when rules change, it opens the box for more creativity, right? Because then all of a sudden our parameters are gone. I was like, hey, I can go right when I couldn't go right before. Let's try this, what this looks like. And every time there's a rule change, it gets exploited in some way to where they got to make another rule change, say, no, not that much, but you can do it, but and which is cool, because that means people are pushing the limits, and there's a line, they're trying to cross it, and that's ultimately what a world group should be trying to do, right? Every single time. But ultimately, when we're thinking about concepts now, I think it's more so what kind of effect we can get across, and we take aesthetics pretty seriously, because I've learned that you judge with your eyes first. No matter what. The best group in the world can come in from that back corner, and if their floor is duct taped together and their drums are, missing tension rods, who knows what's going on, but their props are painted and their floor is digitally done, and it's just something doesn't feel right. We automatically have this judgmental, biased or not, it's just the way it's human nature. Yep. We're going to have to, this group is going to have to dig themselves out of a hole, period. Then all of a sudden they've got to make up that extra 50% that you already thinking negative about them, and then play even better than that. Where I think if we can come out and look great, it's going to give our ensemble a better advantage with things. It helps the audience feel more comfortable about what they're looking at. And most importantly, the music already sounds better, whether you know it or not, because it feels good because of what you're looking at. You know what I'm saying?
It's got a little extra razzle dazzle.
Yeah, we could play the last year's show in jeans and a t-shirt. It would still be good, but it'd be way better the way it was produced,
I'm pretty sure I did see it in jeans and t-shirt.
It was, yeah.
And I did think it was pretty good, but
no, it was. And I was like, man, this is the best jeans and t-shirt show we've ever done. But yeah, it's, the production value or the capabilities of that comes first. The second thing is we rely on our assets. Our assets are our designers, and the tools that they use to do that. It's Ben Brizendine, who just aged out. He's a member that does all of our lights. People don't know that, but since 2016, a member's been doing that. The staff, we design the scheme and what it needs to be, but he's the one building the system and programming it and operating the show. He's pretty, we call him the Wiz. Because it's clearly what he is. Yeah. And but yeah, it's, we use, every group has their own set of assets, you know what I'm saying? And everybody needs to exploit them. And we've got ours, and we try to, stretch out and be creative as much as we can with that. But conceptually is definitely what can we do that's going to be effective that people will remember, and, the medium idea was like, hey, let's, this whole thing about voices being filtered through social media or being misrepresented or whatever, how can we be creative and represent that without being on the nose, political or whatever? It's like, cool, let's take the idea of filtering. Okay, well, what's our assets? Well, we got all these great audio people. Let's do some stuff with processing, because it's kind of been done before, but we wanted to do it, and kind of get after it. Yeah. And so we used the idea of what that would sound like, and we tested all the instruments, man, create all these effects before we started writing. And just trying to get the idea and the sound out of what that filtered idea would look like, and then last year Soul was, we just wanted to kind of work on space, like do some things that were like not space, but like use space in the music a little bit more. And it got us to wanting to do the processing thing again, but we wanted to make it we wanted to have an instrument carry the scene with being processed. And we felt the gong was the best way to do that. And the gong represented the sun. I mean, it all just fell into place with the circles. And it was just like, yeah, this is what we're doing.
Yeah, I mean, there's not much that fills up a basketball arena like the sound of a gong.
Yeah, the way that, dude, what was that, Matt? Was it 40 inches or 44? What was that?
44. Yeah. 44. So we got a custom 44 inch from Splice. And seriously, the first time, I mean, I wish everybody could have heard that live, because like the first time we did a roll on that thing with a close mic'd 44 inch gong coming through a sound, like an awesome sound system with subwoofers, like I giggled like a little schoolgirl, like I seriously, like when he did that first roll, it was like, oh, that's so cool, that is so amazing. Because like seriously, we hadn't put a single effect on it yet, we hadn't done any of our magic to it, and just listening to that gong close mic'd was like, it rumbled the inside that you didn't know you had. And like that was like our goal with this, is like, that sound of playing a gong really close, well, you never get that sound in front, like when you're in an audience, and that we were able to create that sound in the audience for everybody, and it was pretty awesome. So yeah,
it was really, really neat texture.
Yeah, and part of the reasoning was that is like, to kind of answer your question in further detail, Mike, is that not as designers we get bored. That's kind of definitely not the right answer to that, but we want to try different things, like try to reach the audience in a different manner, because every group marches, they play, they have uniforms, they have a floor, they got some props, and they have sound design. Other than doing this really well, what else are you doing, right? So every year we're also thinking about the and. Okay, Mystique can do all this, but we're also bringing the and to the table. And the lights is one, and the sound design is like, well, that's cool. It's kind of been done before, but let's max it out. Okay, that's cool. But what other experience can we bring the audience? And that was, we wanted to bring them into more of an immersive environment. So we wanted them to feel the gong. We wanted their eyes to react to the lights, these strobes that we were doing on these impacts. So they would, like just all these different things that we wanted the audience to experience from watching our show. And then we figured out ways to do that with the tools and things like that. And Soul helped us because it was creative, and we could do the lights on the flashes and do the way that they were organized on the marimbas. We were getting ready to literally put them on all the props. And actually they were on there, but we never got them done because, COVID and all, that thing.
Yeah. So, I mean, I'll say this, I have never seen lights done like that in the marching arts before. I mean, and I know I saw it early season and it wasn't all dialed in yet, but like the luminosity, the brightness, and the presence that the lights, especially on the keyboards, and what they brought to the table from an audience member, or from my perspective as a judge, like, I'm judging music. I'm not even really caring about what the lights do, but the way that it interacted with everything and the coordination from audio to visual was like something that really stuck out to me, even early season, as a music judge that doesn't really pay attention to that.
Yeah. And so here's a video. Better.
Like just a quick little 5-second video of what we were doing lighting wise. This was the very first weekend. I think we had some of the lighting in there within here. So you can just watch the keyboards. So you'll notice that you don't see a single light. You don't even know it's there. And so like having those little things pop out, and also all the gongs having those kind of shadow box type of things in front of them really allowed us to kind of make those gongs pop within that. So yeah, that was super, super cool with what we were doing with that on there. But let me kind of actually go to something else real fast. So one of the things Shane mentioned that I really think is super crucial is we spend a lot of time experimenting before we actually write music. So a good example of that is this was us with the people who are auditioning for Mystique 2017. So like this is actually a lot of members that didn't even end up making it, but we were just experimenting with different setups. And so like while they're playing exercises and things like that, they didn't have a single lick of show music. They didn't even know what the show was. We're sitting here kind of putting them in different forms.
This is Hand of Man.
Yeah, this is for Hand of Man.
Yeah.
And so we're setting up different things to see how they handle it. And so let me see. So like we put up different things that we didn't end up using. We moved them farther apart. we just, and this is with no in-ears or anything like that. We were just seeing what they could handle kind of acoustically within this. So putting them in different places on the floor, you know, and then this is my favorite video. So this is, again, they didn't know what the show was. All of a sudden I brought in these connectors from Pearl that connected the marimbas together. And I then explained to them that we were going to try to spin the marimbas around. And they looked at me like I was crazy. So this is literally the very first time we spun the marimbas around. So
we got way faster at it.
Yeah, they were very hesitant the first time because they didn't know what I was asking them to do. And then I think I told them, I don't know if you can hear the audio, but I told them to do it twice fast.
I'm going to have you guys stop at the straight line, but I guess you can keep going.
Set correctly on this one. It'll be fine. Yeah, like they're going that slow the first time. Let's get them around the first rotation, and then I tell them to do it twice as fast.
Okay, awesome. So now I want you to do it twice as fast.
What?
Yeah. So that was the first time. Again, you can look at like people over here like, what are they doing?
Okay, cool. Now stop straight.
Trying to figure out, because again, they didn't know what the show was. They didn't know we were going to be on the floor. They didn't know we were going to be doing anything.
We were doing all that before we showed them anything. So they're like, what is going on over here? You know?
Yeah, but even like down to like, you know, we had custom fabricated pieces made that allowed us to kind of mount those floor toms and bongos. I mean, this was, you know, in December. So like we, you know, maybe had an opener done, but like they hadn't learned drill or anything yet. And so like, yeah, we were already planning out how we were connecting all the bongos and kind of toms and everything to it to kind of make all this work. All the technology had already been planned, where we were having, you know, wireless units and things like that mounted on the marimbas to be able to have that stuff wireless. Like that had all been planned really early. And I think Shane will attest, one of the things that we knew that year was we were either going to get first or we were going to get, like, you know, out of finals. You know, there was no middle ground. You know, it was either going to be really bad or it was going to be awesome.
Well, it's a good thing you had, you know, seasoned marimba moving veterans like Cameron Figueroa to you know, help those guys out.
Exactly. So, but yeah, seriously, I think that we came into that season with like, let's just throw this against the wall, and if it works, awesome. And it luckily did. So
yeah, well, that's super cool. So it's awesome to see kind of behind the curtain and how you guys do things the way that you do them. And you know, it's no secret that like that level of organization and trust and collaboration with each other is definitely going to breed success, especially as you guys you know, work together over a period of time. So let's kind of stay a little bit on the same page, but shift gears a little bit. Technology. Obviously, you guys use quite a bit of it. Matt, you're a bit of a guru in the marching arts audio page and all of that stuff, kind of a go-to guy. What are maybe like your essential items? Like, say I'm a younger designer or someone that wants to get into arranging or wants to start to explore it in like a DAW a little bit more you know, than I do now. What would you recommend? Like, what are the essential items in order to be successful or to set yourself up for success?
Yeah, I mean, I think the number one thing is learn how to use MainStage. I think that, you know, even before you get to the design process, learning how a program like MainStage works as for the kind of translation into the marching art. So no matter how well you can write in Logic, you have to know how to translate that into the marching activity. And MainStage is what everybody's using. I think that every finalist WGI group used it. I mean, I think all but one finalist a DCI group used it. I'm guessing 90% of finalist BOA bands use it. It's just one of those things that it's really designed to do what it does really, really well. And that's live performance within that.
Some not so subtle shade for Ableton users there.
No, and that's why I said I knew DCI wise, or it might have not have been DCI, but BOA wise, I know that Matt Black with Carmel was using Ableton. I know Ronald Reagan uses Ableton, and Ableton's phenomenal. But the big reason that I always choose MainStage over Ableton is MainStage is $30, Ableton is $600. So Ableton can do some things that MainStage can't, but also MainStage can do some things way easier than Ableton can. So I think there's a trade-off, and also the integration between Logic and MainStage, I think, is such a crucial thing. So while you can write in Ableton and also perform in Ableton, I would say the number of groups that are going to shell out $600 for Ableton is pretty low. versus shelling out $30 for main stage. And so I think that it's kind of the industry standard for that reason. I mean, like Hamilton uses main stage in the pit, you know, really most of the Broadway shows use main stage. They're not using Ableton, but they might use Ableton for a different purpose, which is like a playback rig of backing tracks and things like that. But they're going to use main stage for synth sounds. And a lot of that's because of ease of use. Ableton is not designed to be easy to use, even though it's very, very powerful. And I can hand a high school kid a main stage concert that's well designed, and he'll know what to do instantly within that, you know, versus if I handed them an Ableton file, you have to have somebody come train you on how to use an Ableton file within that. So that's the big difference. I mean, there's nothing wrong with Ableton by any stretch. It's just I think it's not as user friendly for what we do, and the troubleshooting is a lot harder. So if you have somebody that's willing to run it, it's totally fine. But then at that point, getting it, even in something like GarageBand, like even before you get to Logic, getting in something like GarageBand, putting in some marching band show or putting in some indoor show, and then just trying to add sound design layers on top of that. I mean, one of the things that I kind of usually recommend to people is like there's different kind of levels to sound design. You know, with sound design, we kind of start with the most important to me is like the actual synth design. You know, if you're designing for Hamilton or you're designing for a big Broadway show, the first thing you're doing is getting all the synth patches right, because that's going to, a lot of the synth patches are going to have sounds and going to have tails, and they're going to have all of these things that might interfere with if you did sound design first. So if you get the synth sounds right, you're going to get that all kind of worked out. Then at that point, you add the kind of environmental layer, I would call it. So like a lot of the sounds that Filosa writes that he does a really great job of is all the sounds that create that world, but don't necessarily have rhythms to themselves. You know, they kind of create these, ebbs and flows and kind of sounds. Like 2018's, I think my favorite that he did with all these little kind of vocal sounds and all this kind of stuff that just create a world that aren't supposed to be interpreted as like an event within that. And then you also have the things that are interpreted as events. So I would things like voiceovers, any sort of vocal singing, any sorts of things like that. Those are supposed to be interpreted as like kind of an important thing that you're supposed to listen to and focus on. And then the last one is kind of like Foley effects. So if you have ever paid attention to like movie sound, Foley is like them creating sounds like a door closing or like, somebody walking through rocks. It's like all the sound effects we would call. And so having that layer is a separate thing. So if you can go through and like learn how to do each of those kind of layers at a basic level, you're going to understand some of the basics to get started into creating your own thing underneath those kind of textures and layers within that. You can do so many things in GarageBand before you get to Logic. And then once you get into Logic, the library just gets huge. I mean, there's something like 55, 60 gigabytes worth of samples available in Logic. So if you don't know how to use everything in Logic, you probably don't need to buy any external libraries. The one exception I would say is Omnisphere is kind of the industry standard for some of the kind of sound bed and environment and ambient things, especially kind of at a lower level within that. And the synth sounds in Omnisphere are also phenomenal. Like, so for example, with Mystique, we have main stages and Logic's built-in sounds, and we have Omnisphere, and that's really it. We don't have any other external libraries on Mystique's computers, unless we need one sound for a certain show within that, and we might install one library for that show. But as a basic kind of ground level, we just have that. For Bluecoats, we do add Complete Ultimate within that, so it's a Native Instruments library, and we just use that because, especially the stuff that we did with the Beatles last summer, or 2 summers ago. I can't believe that's 2 summers ago. But we need some like bass guitar sounds and really good piano sounds, and some of the stuff we would never use with Mystique. We're using a lot more of the kind of pop things because of the orchestrations that we're doing for a show like that within there. So yeah, I would say really Logic, a good set of headphones as well, a good set of monitoring, so either speakers or headphones, and a MIDI controller of some sort. Really you don't need an audio interface to do things at a high level at first. It does help long term, but overall, if you have a good computer, a DAW of some sort, some monitoring solution, so speakers or headphones, and a MIDI controller, you can pretty much write the next Grammy-winning record. I mean, literally, if you look at some of the EDM guys, like Deadmau5 or Skrillex or any of those guys, literally, they wrote all that kind of stuff in their computer entirely, like not even with a MIDI keyboard. So
or even like, Billie Eilish with Phineas and all of that stuff.
Yeah. There's some pretty incredible videos of Billie Eilish and Phineas. They record all that at home with just like a computer with Logic and a single microphone, and they literally have won more Grammys than most people would ever dream to have. And I think that's the crazy thing now is that the tools that we have available to us in 2020 for under $1,000, you can have more power than the Beatles could afford with millions of dollars of Abbey Road studios. You know, I think that's the crazy thing. And one of the really interesting things of the Bluecoats design process in 2019 was I was having to use 2020 technology to try to make everything sound like it was recorded in 1960s. And so like I actually had to do a lot of research. I've never researched as much as I did for that show of figuring out like what kind of microphones and signal paths were they using to make things sound like that. Because it's not as easy as just adding an EQ. You know, sometimes it's like you have to use certain types of reverbs or certain types of things to make things sound like that.
Yeah.
And so it's just really cool to know that even with an iPhone, like with GarageBand on your iPhone, you can actually write and have more power than people had in the 70s. So
I can't wait for Bluecoats 2021 where Matt will like create his own plate reverbs that they'll have out there.
Live on the field, to be clear. So
yeah, absolutely. So yeah, that's awesome. Do you find yourself when you're mixing, do you find yourself using headphones more or using monitors?
I actually haven't used headphones to do any writing or mixing in a while. If I'm doing like so in my other life, like I mentioned, I kind of focus on concert percussion stuff as well. So I do some audio recording for concert percussion things. So when you're doing things like splices and edits between things, headphones, you can hear a little bit more detail. But I don't ever use that for things like balance or EQ or anything like that. I'm more using it for accuracy and knowing how the alignment works and things like that. But no, really 90% of the time I'm on monitors. So right now I'm using it at school. So I'm here in my office at school. So I have Presonus Eris 8 XTs, and I've really been happy with them. This is my first time using those. And then at home I have some Yamaha HS80Ms within that. So which I think, Mike, you have the same thing with that.
Yeah, I've got mine survived a tornado, so they look a little worse for wear, but they still sound fantastic. So
yeah. So no, overall good monitors, and they last forever. My Yamahas I bought in 2011 when I was starting with Shane at Phantom, and I'm still using those at home. I mean, so like, you know, they're going on 11 years on the same monitors, and they still sound awesome.
Yeah, cool. So when I personally was learning Logic and kind of diving into more of the DAW stuff, I was super lucky to have Matt as a resource, and we would gather at his house on Sundays with a little bottle of grape juice, and he would teach me the way. If you don't have a resource like that available to you, where would you go to learn?
I think the biggest thing, and like I mentioned earlier, like writing for the marching arts is a lot like film scoring. And so not trying to approach it like if you go look at how somebody writes like a pop tune in Logic, you're not going to get any of the right information. But if you go and you look at how people do film scoring, that's really what we do. We're essentially doing film scoring just in reverse. And so a lot of the tutorials that you'll find for film scoring and the different sample library companies, that's really where you're getting a lot of the information within that. And then also there's some really awesome stuff for main stage specifically that the worship community has come up with. And so if you go look at like some church communities and worship communities, main stage is used by them almost exclusively. And so there's excellent tutorials because there's so many more worship musicians out there than there are marching arts synthesizer players, you know, and so well, maybe not that many more, but still, you know, there's a lot of them out there. And it's a big market. And so really I would say those tutorials have been one of the biggest ways that I've learned main stage throughout the years, and especially gotten to that upper level of information. And there's also a guy named Brian Lee, so L-I is his last name, that has a website. It's changed a few times, so I don't know exactly what it is now. I haven't looked in about a year or so. But he had a bunch of really advanced, all the way from beginner main stage tutorials all the way through the really advanced stuff. He does a lot of the programming for Broadway. And so like he's got a guy who's not only at the top level of using main stage, but he's even like doing programming for main stage, like in scripting and programming languages that are then used within main stage. And so some of the things we've actually used at Mystique have been from Brian's MIDI scripts that he's written, that I've found those and kind of done some fun things with those for Mystique. Within that. So yeah, there's lots of resources out there. Just know what you're looking for. So same deal, you can kind of find information on doing sound effects and Foley on YouTube, but really YouTube at this point, it's excellent to learn practically everything. And again, I think even from a mixer standpoint, learning how to do live audio, same deal, the church and worship people have excellent tutorials, because that's a big normal thing, is you have volunteers that are offering to help with that audio stuff but don't know what they're talking about. And so they have a lot of videos that kind of cover how to use a Behringer X32 from the ground up, how to use a Persona Studio Live from the ground up, things like that. So yeah, I've been really impressed with all the things from the worship community. And then obviously, like you mentioned, the Marching Arts audio discussion page on Facebook is another excellent place. You can find myself, Evan Brown, all the California guys, like really everybody that's, the who's who of people in audio for the Marching Arts are all in that group, and all really nice and happy to answer questions for that. And so that's, I think, the best group. If you're a band director or a percussion instructor and you want to learn more about that stuff, being in that group and just searching, the important thing is to do some searches first before you ask questions, because I guarantee your question has been asked and answered about 10 times, and there's been great conversation about it before.
I'll go ahead and give you a spoiler alert. If you're wanting to know how to properly mic a flute, clarinet, or alto saxophone, I guarantee you can find it in the search.
Yes. Usually the first answer on those posts is, please search,
Yeah.
So awesome. Well, that's great. I mean, there's so much great information out there, and that's some really, really excellent resources. So I appreciate that, Matt.
Yep.
All right, let's get into the big news, the big information that everyone wants to know about from you guys. Mystique 2021. Obviously, we're still in the COVID era, so to speak, and nationally, WGI is not going to do any in-person shows. Locally, we're here in Nashville, we're going to do in-person shows so long as they're safe. So what does that look like for Mystique?
I've got permission to talk about a few things. Yeah, I mean, just in general, surely people understand that independent groups are going to have a far tougher time getting things going than high school groups, just for the sheer fact of what's going on, and people don't want outside groups in their schools, right? So that alone, there's going to be a massive drop off on independent involvement. Whether or not they have a facility or not, they may not have a goal, and it doesn't matter. I don't know. Everybody's in different situations. High schools are going to be a little bit different, because they're probably going to go on as normal, and they're going to do a normal drumline show, and then they're going to video it, and they're going to send it into WGI, because they've already invested the resources and time into doing a drumline show for the local circuit, right?
Yep.
So that's kind of how I see that panning out on that end of things. Unless they can't do it and they're going to do something creative, whatever. But if they're doing a normal drumline show, I totally see people being involved with the WGI thing. Mystique, however, will not be doing anything competitive on the WGI side of things as far as online. We will be submitting creative videos and things like that on the creative platform, but nothing on the competitive level. Locally, we'll be making appearances, doing what we're doing, at local shows and things like that. But it will definitely not be a traditional drumline season for Mystique at all. The members know that we know is coming to do it. We're still holding auditions. We're still moving forward. We're still going to be creative in what we do. And people need to expect that. We're not just going to stand still and play a drumline show and be like, we did it for this year, COVID, and then we move on to the next year. Like our goal is to come out of this with another and of Mystique, like Mystique does this and that. And
yeah,
I guess I can't really talk about in detail what that is, but the members will have fun, and we're going to do some really unique stuff. So
yeah, and I won't ruin anything, Shane, because I know I didn't talk to Josh, but I think the big thing is that in a normal competitive year, the competition is what hangs over everyone's head. You're always focused on the show, because that's what you're always having to be focused on in order to be competitive with everybody else. And I think this year we see it as an opportunity to take advantage of the fact that we don't have that hanging over our head. So while we're still going to do something that's very interesting from that perspective, we also are going to be able to do some things that we've always wanted to maybe try or do without feeling like we're taking unnecessary risks, and so I think that we can be creative and do our normal style or direction of activity, but while also kind of finding some new avenues, like Shane's talking about, of, putting ourselves in places that we normally wouldn't be because of the type of group we are.
Yeah.
Yeah. So is that good enough?
Yeah, leaving a little bit of secrecy there, leaving everybody wanting a little bit more. I see what you're doing. I see what you're doing.
Well,
Yeah.
I think the other part of that is that, as this all develops, we're developing our ideas of what this is just the same. So, while we do have some pretty concrete ideas of things we're doing, there's also things that we haven't told even the members because we have ideas that we want to make sure we can execute before we, kind of plan certain things.
Yeah, you don't want to like overpromise and underdeliver, right? On something we've never done before. Now, the interesting thing about all this is like all of us designers, staff, everybody, members, we've been doing this for decades of having the same conversation every year. What kind of show you want to do? What uniforms? What props? Rinse and repeat. What kind of show you want to do? I mean, like literally that's what it's been. And that's been our wheelhouse, right? We're just spinning this plate around. Now people, they better be asking some different questions. Because if you're asking those same questions still, you're probably sitting around waiting for different things, right? I've talked to friends, they're just waiting for things to get back to normal. I'm like, bro, it ain't going to be back to normal. You're going to need to do something else, right?
Yep.
But I think it's a perfect opportunity. I've actually loved it and enjoyed the breath of space. It's like it's a guilt-free break. You know what I'm saying? With like having to
100%.
like dig in and do some of this stuff. So, but it also allows us to be creative and stretch out a little bit, like what Matt is saying, without like, man, but we can only do this because we got to play those flam drags clean. We can't do this other stuff because we got to do this clean, kind of thing. So it opens up our focus a little bit more. But I think the cool thing about all this is as groups kind of find their niche and what they're going to do and how they're going to survive this. I just think that people need to understand that like the important thing that they need to do is like they need to get together and play with their homies. That's it.
Yep.
You know what I'm saying? And if a group can provide 4 walls and a roof of that, then they need to go forward by any means necessary. And if they don't, they're going to be doing their group of the service along with the membership in their area and that kind of thing. So that's kind of the approach we're taking, and we're going to, by any means necessary, we're going to move forward and do what we can do and bring the production value that we normally do with whatever we do, and that's hopefully the goal here with it. But yeah, I'm actually excited about it. It's something new. It's something fun. And we'll just kind of see where it goes, because we don't know either.
That's awesome. Yeah, a good buddy of mine, Dan Morrison, who's the head director at Ronald Reagan High School, he's been really talking about how this year you're exploring creativity and doing things differently. And that may always have, or initially people may have a negative reaction to that and think that that's, a bad thing because it's different. But, his mantra for Reagan and kind of what I've adopted at Franklin and what we've done with other groups or, what I've tried to talk to other circuits about is just different doesn't mean worse. Like this is how we evolve what we do. This is how we take things to the next level. And we figure out different avenues that because you were stuck in that cycle that you were just talking about, you don't have time to think about. So I'm pumped for like what WGI 2028 looks like because of what's happening in 2021.
Oh, 100%, man. I just think that opportunity is great because the cool things that people figure out now, they're going to apply it in their shows eventually. And figure out ways to do that. They may not even do WGI as we know it anymore. Maybe they do whatever new class WGI comes up with.
Galactic class, it's happening.
Nobles Galactic class, yeah.
Galactic. We're finally making it happen. But yeah, I mean, and the cool thing about this is circuits are going to be hurting for people to come perform, right? If they actually do have in-person stuff, with guidelines, of course, and the fact that that's going to go on, I mean, groups are going to be able to kind of come as you are, like bring something to the table. Yeah. People will clap for you, like get your kids out there, let them perform, let them do something, and the rest will fall into place. They'll have performance opportunities. It'll be good.
Awesome. Well, I'm really looking forward to seeing what you guys bring to the table and kind of exciting new ideas, and you guys are always super creative with what you do, and now I'm excited to see it in whatever it's going to be.
Oh, we have an idea what it's going to be. We just can't really tell the membership. We're supposed to be meeting with them here in the next few days.
Hey, I
kind of do a little chat on them, but if we had this meeting like 2 days later, we'd be like, spill the beans, but we're not. No.
Cool. So just a couple of questions for you guys. Question 1, where do you guys find new music? or find new art that inspires you?
Shane pulling it off the old noggin,
Yeah.
But no, overall, I mean, I think that really we look to a variety of resources. I mean, like we've done music from kind of pop artists like Square Peg Round Hole. We've done music for choir. We've done music for like all sorts of things. And so I think that just having an open ear, I mean, I'm constantly on the search for stuff. And as I come across stuff throughout the whole year, I always have like a Mystique future playlist, just like I have a Bluecoats future playlist. And so like if I hear something, no matter where it is, I'll just throw it in that playlist. I don't really analyze it or try to think what it's going to be good for. I just kind of throw it in that playlist. And then usually when we start our conversations in, August, July, whatever, that's usually when I just kind of send that playlist out to everybody, say like, I'm not trying to say that this is what I think the show should be, but like, here's some things that are inspiring me that I think are cool. And then at that point, that can lead down the rabbit hole. There's a lot of times where like one tune in like the Spotify new music playlist, I'll be like, man, this is a pretty cool track. And so I'll just go ahead and like save like 2 or 3 of the albums from that artist. And then I'll just like over the course of a few days, just listen to those albums. Like, most of it might not be right for us. But I might find that one thing. And that's how, that opener in 2019, that's how I found that was, I had on Spotify, it was like a, electronic jazz playlist or something like that. And I just happened to hear this one tune by this artist named John Camille Farah. And it wasn't the one we ended up using, but it was like, man, it was like acoustic piano music with like really hip, like drum and bass electronic stuff. And it was like, this is a weird combination. But I could tell it was real acoustic piano. It was not like even like MIDI programmed piano. It was like, this guy knows what he's doing.
Yeah.
And so I went and like just searched his YouTube channel and found just by chance that tune. So I had it in the list for maybe 2 years. And then like when we finally ended up doing 2019, it's one of those that I went back to that tune and was like, man, like this is perfect. Like this is exactly what we need for this. So again, it came from a total random, just like Spotify, YouTube playlist, within that, that I just kind of put and saved. And we typically have a folder of tunes that might've been in there since 2014, that we all like, and it just doesn't fit in that year, and so there's no reason to throw it out and start all over every year when we have tunes we know can start some inspiration. Within that, like, 2017, 2018, we don't need happy, bright music, and so like any stuff that was happy and bright was just instantly like, okay, cool, I'll push that off to a future playlist within that. And so sometimes you just know when the energy's right and it just kind of comes back around within that. But again, I think exposing yourself to a wide range of music, like not just kind of, if you like pop stuff, don't just listen to pop stuff, jump into some contemporary stuff on YouTube, like, contemporary chamber ensembles, or some orchestra stuff. I mean, you're all over the place. And I think that's going to make your algorithm start showing weirder and weirder things. And we find our coolest stuff comes from the weirdest stuff,
Yeah.
Yeah, 2017 again was a concerto for marimba and choir. Like, who would think that would work? But it worked awesome,
Yeah. Shane, you have any secret places aside from the old noggin?
I think I try to be inspired by my surroundings. Like I'll carry a notepad either. I have like a running list of 100 or a couple hundred ideas, like on a tablet or like a Evernote that I use. Or if I got notepads all around the house, that wherever I'm at, I can scratch them down. Because, I write, if I'm just thinking of something like, oh, that'd be cool, there's a show in that, I'll write it down. And then, a couple of weeks later, I go back and I look at it, it's like, okay, cool, we could develop into this. But typically the things that inspire me are like textures, things that we can create an idea around. Like when we did Soul last year, like it wasn't about space. It was like, we wanted this cool texture and this gong that we could process. And then we built the show kind of around what that is. And we took the idea that it was a circle. Cool. What is that? Okay, it's a sun. It represents this. Cool. What does that sound like? And that's talking about the strobe lights. Like, that's awesome. And then we started thinking about, going to the audio things like, well, we need stuff that tinkles and it's real high end and really ethereal. So then we started looking for that kind of music, because we want it to match what it looks like. Right.
Yeah.
And feels like. So that's kind of the process of that. Like we'll, just be inspired by something and it'll just blow up into something else that ends up being, whatever it is. One year we were on one of our little outings, we were at in Gatlinburg, and we're walking around this nasty aquarium that smells like, dead penguin. And we're, we're sitting there and all of a sudden I hear this ping in the background. It's like ping, ping. And I'm like, what is that? So I'm like walking around looking, and it was this, they had like an exhibit, whatever, but it was about Pearl Harbor. And the pingings that I was hearing was the sailors inside pinging the boat. Like they just had this audio thing that was just on repetition. And I walked up and I heard that audio and I looked at it and just looked at it. I was like, dude, this is an emotional show built right here. It's got the sound file of the pings. It's got all this still, and so I've made a show out of that, not with Mystique, but that moment right there inspired me because it had the emotional context with that sound, like immediately. And so I was able to kind of just develop something really cool from that. Just textures, surroundings, sounds. I mean, dude, everything. My brain is inside whatever it is. If I can make money off of it and create a show, by God, I'm gonna figure it out. Yeah. So that's it, man. So,
well, and I think so. Let me pull this up again. So, like going to this this image, like 2017 was entirely based on this image. So, like I think every different year we've had a different inspiration. Like if I go back to like this year, this was a sculpture. If I go to 2019, that was a YouTube video of
so kind of like what Matt's talking about. That image right there, particularly, was for Hand to Man, and I was just not Instagram. Sorry, Pinterest. You asked me where I see all the stuff. It's actually Pinterest. So I just get on there and literally just get lost and start finding stuff. And I ran across this image, and I was like, there's a story behind this. What is that? And then we took that and was like, you know what? Man kills itself. They have this last thing and, they're just grasping for air. And it's like this one thing they're getting this oxygen from. So that's what we came up with the Hand to Man, the black hands, the handprints, like they were physically dying and like leaving stuff on them and reaching for the tree. This, the famous reach that everybody does kind of thing is like this tree of life that's back there. So, from that one image, I was able to kind of like tell this dark story of why that image exists, and so that was a very inspiring photo. For clearly, we got a gold medal out of that, so it came from literally that one picture.
Also, fashion foreshadowing for current day.
I know, right?
Oh, yeah, exactly.
I was trying to find a picture of the uniform, but I actually don't have like a really kind of straight on shot. I guess there we go. Which, funny enough, this was just somebody had cropped the picture like this. That's where it says WGI World Championships, and somebody had cropped it just perfectly to work like that. But yeah, I mean that just it just really ties into that image we initially saw, and kind of and we found our own ways to do it. I mean, because like originally it wasn't anything about hands or anything like that, but really it kind of started with the idea that our extremities were kind of dying off, and like we were thinking, is there a way that we can kind of be leaving a mark on something? And then it's kind of the idea of like, imagine if your hands are dying off and then you have black hands. Well, then we can see those handprints. So really it didn't start initially as the handprints as much as it did just like the idea of us killing those trees, within that. But then how do you show that you're killing the trees, and that turned into the handprints and things like that. So it's just developing slowly that idea kind of through that.
Yeah. And we originally had like tanks and cable, like the mask was way further developed when it was originally, but we're like, you know what? Just having the mask on was plenty. We didn't need to do all the extra theatrics and stuff like that to get the idea across, so so that kind of stuff. And those are the textures and the layers that people remember that give us the identity, but they weren't what built the show,
Sure.
So all those things become, after the fact, if we're already inspired and we're kind of moving forward with things. So, but that's pretty much how it goes with everything. We got a show, we got it on the floor. It's like, oh, this is great. But if we did this, and let's turn it to 11, and kind of figure that out. But one of our biggest key assets, who I haven't mentioned yet, is Jeff Watkins, and he's the guy that does our choreography. He's inspired by the notes that we give him, say, hey, do this and do that. But he's the one that's coming up with it and making sure that it fits the theme. And when we do choreography, we really make sure that we're not doing the same thing that everybody does. And they do like little stuff that we did 20 years ago. We really try to make sure that this year's show is this year's choreography. Next year's show is that year's choreography. We never use the same stuff from end to end. Yeah. And like, for instance, like back in Mantra, when we were doing that, I was like, man, none of us are yogis. We don't know how this should move, So we hired a yogi to come in and teach the ensemble all these poses and transitions. And then we use that as our palette for choreography that year, right?
Yeah.
New Tribe, we found an old video it was a remake of what the Rite of Spring choreography would be based off of notes.
Mm-hmm.
So we found a YouTube video where somebody had remade that with all the cool angular bird choreography and stuff that they were doing in it. And we applied some of those things to New Tribe. And so like that was kind of what we used for our palette of choreography, that we didn't steal anything per se. We weren't doing phrases from that like we've seen people do, right? But we definitely have definitely been inspired by things and really try to brand a show with an identity. I think the mistake that people make sometimes is like, ooh, I've seen a group do this before. Let me put it in my show. And it's like, that's the most ridiculous thing I've ever heard or seen, because now you're literally putting that stick toss that a group does, you know what I'm saying, in your show. And it may not fit, but that group gets applause for it.
Yep.
But it doesn't for you. You don't understand. It's like, well, it wasn't coordinated that way. You know, you're putting this afterthought in there because you thought it was cool that somebody else is doing it. So we really try to make sure that what we do is ours. It's original, to some extent inspired by things. And that really helps our show sound like this. And we do the same thing with sound design. Yep. When Philosis doing it, we like, what is this year's show going to sound like? And then next year, and we make sure we zag so much from that, you know, nobody says, oh, you use that same sound last year or whatever.
Right.
The same leg kick where you hold on the knee and we're dancing. Watch out.
Same one we've seen everyone do.
Yeah.
Well, and I think such a big part of that, I mean, like, not many people know this, but Shane, like, while he is not a sound designer or front ensemble arranger by any means, like, that dude has great ears. And so, like, when it comes time to, like, be able to connect all the little sound design elements and all the little visual elements and all the different pieces together, there's not many people that focus on those type of things. I mean, I still say that Shane has the best ears for sound design in terms of, like, knowing when, like, there's a sample missing, he's the first one to be like, hey, where'd that sample go? You know,
because I know that it matched something in the visual program that enhanced it, you know, because I wrote something there. So when I'm watching it, I have this like overall immersive experience. And when one of those things isn't right, I'm like, what is that? You know, because everything is so dialed in detail with what we do and has a purpose and a reason. If it's not there, it's the piece of the puzzle's missing, you know?
Right. Yeah.
And where, you know, we're being rehearsal, and even the audio guys, that's their job, not Matt and those guys, but the guys that are there doing it, they're focused on the player doing stuff, but they're not hearing it in the ensemble because they're not hearing it that it's missing, right?
Yeah.
Or they might be standing next to the speaker and they heard it, but it was just balanced wrong. Does that make sense?
Yeah.
Right.
So just little things like that we look at and just make sure it's all dialed in, you know, and it's if I don't hear it and see it at the same time, then we need to get that working, you know.
Because I think that happens, you know, in every group, but I think that we're better than most about dealing with it. Is that there's a lot of times where staff members, their blinders on, like, I deal with the quads or I deal with the front ensemble, and like they might come up, like they might be listening to a part of the music. And actually, I remember a story from back when Eric was writing back in 2004. There's a section from American Beauty by Thomas Newman. It's like the little ballad section, and if you looked at that marimba part, you would laugh. You know, it'd be like, this is not even A class. Like, it's so easy. But so it was one rehearsal where some of the marimba players that were in that group were like, oh, we can make this cooler, you know. And so they kind of figured out a part that like still sounded kind of similar, but like was a little bit more athletic. And Eric came in and like he was like almost distraught. He's like, you guys don't understand why this was written like that, you know, like it was written like that on purpose to capture a certain character, and you guys are doing something to be marimba gymnastics, and that's not why this was written at all. And I think there's moments like that, and there's also one of my other favorite things from DCI. There's what year is that? 2004 Vanguard, when Jim Casella was still writing. There was this magical pit moment of the Scheherazade stuff where it was some of the easiest keyboard notes in the show, but it was like the front ensemble feature was super, super easy. And like, but it was just perfect musically. And then the phrase, when the brass comes back in and they're not featured anymore, they play some of the hardest stuff in the show. It's just one of those things, like knowing that like you don't have to have When You're Alone be the most important moments, and you don't, you just have to know what's right for the moment from a sound design perspective, from a visual perspective, from a stick toss perspective. You know, it all has to connect and be the right thing for the moment, no matter what that means.
Yeah.
Even if it's rests, nothing.
Yeah. 100%.
You know.
Yep.
Space is cool.
Yep.
Can be.
Can be.
Until it becomes less is just less. So.
Subtle.
Just facts.
All right, pivoting into the next question. This will be a quick one. So when I'm thinking about the timeline of Music City Mystique 2020, I'm seeing a bunch of gongs out there, large gongs that, if I'm not mistaken, were shipped in from Wuhan, China. Now, given what I know about the performance calendar, we usually start shows late January, early February, but I imagine you had them in a little bit earlier than that. So tell me a little bit about what Mystique might have had to do with the coronavirus.
Now that you mention that, I think we've got ground zero. I mean, like,
that's no. So we actually got those gongs like back in December. We had them for quite a while.
Hey, COVID's been around for a hot minute, buddy.
They also did not get shipped from China. They might have been originally from Wuhan, China, but they actually shipped from Steve Weiss Music in good old Pennsylvania. So
the Steve Weiss factory in Wuhan is right next to this like really famous laboratory and a wet market. Also, pretty cool place if you ever visit.
Yeah,
exactly. But yeah, no. So yeah, we had 9 of those things, all from Weiss, and yeah, that was a fun box or a fun pallet to unpack.
I'm sure you got your workout that day.
Oh yeah, it was quite heavy, quite heavy.
All right, so cool. So we're wrapping up here, but obviously you guys are some of the most legendary designers in the activity right now. You guys have so many medals. You've been so successful with what you've done, both in the indoor idiom as well as outdoor. And then Matt, what you do in the concert realm as well, is really big. If I'm, maybe a upper division college student or a younger instructor or someone that's just starting to get involved on the teaching or design staff side of things, what are kind of 3 do's that you have broadly for someone to do to help set themselves up for success to maybe try to do what you guys do?
Maybe I'll go first now. I'm going to say be organized. Be efficient at what you do, but also I don't know if it's going to be 3 do's or not, but don't be, be efficient at what you do. But most importantly, like, don't be afraid to try something. And then the other thing is, like, it's going to have to be free a lot. When you're first starting out, expect to write a bunch of stuff that's going to be free, because that band director may not trust you yet, right? So he may not want to spend the money or resources on you, but he also knows that you're going to show up and be committed to the kids, right? So he's going to give you an opportunity to write. So then that's going to be your end, right? You do that, then you start writing cadences for the group. You start doing a lot of things like that. I mean, I know when I was in high school, I'd written like a dozen cadences already before I got out of high school. They're all trash, but I was at least trying something, doing it. And then, and just write, whether somebody plays it or not, write. And then when somebody tells you it's terrible, don't cry about it. Just move on and do something different. Because the worst thing a ranger can be is like own their music emotionally to the fact that they can't make adjustments when it's just blaringly wrong. I mean, I run into people like that all the time. They're like, hey, what do you think of my score? And they want you to say awesome. You know what I'm saying? And then you go, well, no, your battery phrasing doesn't really line up with anything in the front ensemble. So I'm not really sure what you're doing. It was like, oh, but this, and I'm doing this, and it's all different. It's just like, so it doesn't line up with the front ensemble. It doesn't matter. It sounds like 2 different people wrote it, right?
Right.
So the hard thing to do when you write with a team of people is understanding how to fit into that and make it sound like one person's writing it. Because the worst thing is when you have that kind of vibe where it sounds like you're accompaniment to something else, right? So, and the only way to do that is to write a lot and practice it. You know what I'm saying? So, and like I said, you're probably going to end up doing some stuff for free, and people may not realize that now in today's society that, oh my God, I got to do something for free. Yeah. I do probably more stuff for free right now than I get paid for still. And whether it's, I'm not saying this or anything, but just like consulting with folks to do stuff, or just write stuff for people, or just the amount of music that I have sitting around somewhere that nobody's even playing is probably absurd, and like a lot of rangers have that. So just don't be afraid that everything you do has to be for a purpose. You know what I'm saying? Like, just do it, get it out there. And then eventually your craft will be noticed by people, and then you'll be reliable. That's a big thing, man. Like, you just gotta be reliable, show up and do the right thing and be consistent at what you do. And then that's it, man. But consistency is key also, you know.
Yep.
But that's more than three, man, but you got it.
Yeah. I mean, I think some of mine, and I'm going to kind of be stream of consciousness like Shane. I think the first and foremost is be easy to work with. You know, the people who get hired for things over and over again are the ones that are easy to work with, but also produce good results. You can't just be the guy who's good to get along with, but doesn't produce good results either. You know, it has to be kind of both of those things together within that. Like Shane's saying, be reliable, be dependable, be the guy who's always going to show up, who's always going to send things, who's always going to be the one that is kind of on there. But I think the most important is a lot of people hear the phrase like right place, right time, which is absolutely true, but there's one kind of word left out of that, and that's right preparation. I think the important thing is that like all of you are around situations where you were in the right place at the right time already, but you didn't have the right preparation. And so the person that might give you that opportunity didn't give you that opportunity because you weren't prepared for that opportunity. And so a lot of the situations are like, you know, a lot of the things I've gotten from an arranging standpoint, you know, with Shane or with other people is because, you know, I had been doing all this stuff in the background, kind of just working, kind of doing all these kind of things. And then when that time came up, when like somebody can't do something, it's like, well, you know, I know Matt's been kind of cranking on stuff, and, you know, and you kind of end up with that opportunity to try the first time. And then if you suck the first time, then guess what? You're not going to get called back. But if you continuously deliver and continuously do good things, you're going to get more and more opportunities in those kind of situations within that. Within there, I think that's such a crucial part. I mean, like I have a good student of mine, Nick Sipe, who used to work with Franklin and all that kind of stuff. But like he was a arranging student of mine when I was when I was teaching at MTSU, and he was an undergrad, and he took an arranging class with me. And like it's one of those things that like everyone else that was kind of taking lessons or in the class, like it was like, oh no, that was fine, you know. But Nick was just one of those guys that like I could just tell he was really into it, you know. And so like he'd send me a file, I'd be like, man, this is really good, you know. And he'd send me something again, and but like he'd send me more things than I had asked him to do. And it was just one of those that the motivation was there. And so when it came time to somebody say like, hey, you know, can you write my marching band show? I was like, no, man, I'm booked up. Like I can't. I'm sorry. It was like, but I know this student, Nick Sipe, who'd be awesome for you, you know. And he was at the front of mind because he was the one who always was showing the motivation to be that person within that. So Nick's just one example. I have awesome, you know, great students and kind of colleagues that have been in the same kind of boat within that. But I think that right time, right place, right preparation is such a key part of that within there. I had one more, but I think that's good.
Yeah, and I'll kind of piggyback on the last thing that Matt was like, I've given plenty of people opportunities once. You know what I'm saying? And if they don't come through, then I got to move on to the next thing. You know what I'm saying? So like right person at the right time, 100%. And I'll give somebody an opportunity the same way it was given to me, you know, but yeah. I'm going to give somebody enough rope to hang themselves with or pull themselves out of the hole, you know? Yeah. And if they choose the first, then that's on them. You know what I'm saying? And that comes to the preparation thing that Matt's talking about, you know, like if you're not prepared to do it or have the skill set to do it, you may be best buds with this person, but that don't matter if you don't produce. It just doesn't, you know, it's all business. Right. So, so yeah, I mean, it may be fun and passionate, and that may be where it starts, but it's still business, you know?
I do have one more. I remembered one more. So there was a blog post from an audio engineer years and years ago that I still remember to this day, that was talking about like everyone can do what we do well, you know, the kind of basic part of that. And no matter what that field is, whether that's playing percussion or writing indoor drumline shows or, you know, being an engineer, you know, whatever it is, everyone can do the basics of your field well. I think the key is finding what is your unfair advantage that you have. You know, what is the skill set you bring to the table that nobody else has? What's the skill set that you have experience in that people are going to come to you? And like, to be honest, like a lot of the reason I kind of got to be buddy with some guys like Shane and Eric Johnson and Brett Kuhn and those guys is because I learned at a very early age how to use virtual drumline before not many people did. And so I started being the kind of reference point, even though I wasn't writing a lot of music, you know, like I was writing this from little piddly high schools, but I could make my VDL file sound really good. So I'd get calls from Brett and Eric and Shane say like, hey, I'm having a problem with VDL. Can you help me? You know, and so I was kind of, elbow to elbow with the big guys, you know, as a college student, because I had a skill set that nobody else really had. besides everyone calling Casella, which it was like pretty much people would call Casella or people would call me, within that. And obviously there was more people who were doing it too, but like out of the people that were in that kind of circuit, if Eric didn't call Jim, he called me. And so there was a lot of times where I just kind of got to know those people really well, and that's kind of how Eric ended up as a big mentor of mine for a long time as an arranger. Was just I got to work with him closely through Mystique and through Cavaliers, but also through my kind of work with Virtual Drumline, kind of teching before I really kind of kicked off as an arranger full on.
Yeah, that's awesome, man. Like it's so cool to hear like that's how, you kind of carved out your niche right away, showing some value and then, eventually using the relationship seeds that you planted at that time to pay dividends later on in your career. That's really, really cool. And kind of seeing like those dues that you just talked about in action and how that's worked to help set you up for success. So
for sure.
Cool. Well, awesome. This conversation has been really, really great, guys. It's been awesome to see, what your process is like and how you guys do the things that you do and what allows you guys to be successful, not only as individuals, but also on your collective teams that you work as a part of. Before we get out of here, do you guys have anything that you want to plug? What do you guys have going on that you want the people to know about aside from super secret Music City Mystique 2021?
So first and foremost, Mike, I can tell you watch Hot Ones. So I can tell that just by the way that you said that last little phrase. So tell people what you got going on. Camera 1, camera 2, camera 3. That's one of my favorite shows. So with that, I mean, honestly, right now, for me, it's been kind of grinding here at JSU. Right here, kind of getting through the semester in this unprecedented kind of way that we're having to do school and things like that. But overall, yeah, I've been really busy with that stuff. Obviously, planning for Bluecoats, planning for Mystique. Kind of finishing up all the fall stuff that I do with the high school that I work with. So yeah, overall, that's what I've been working on. I don't have a lot of other projects. I've just been mountain biking a lot, which has been a lot of fun. So
awesome.
And hurting myself because I mountain bike a lot. So
you wearing your helmet?
Oh yeah.
Okay. Do they have a helmet that big?
Funny enough, I actually had to special order it. So.
I know. That's why I asked that question.
I got a big dome, if you don't know.
Dude, he's got a melon. Like, he's got a big old brain in there. But
Shane, what you got going on?
Well, of course, Synced Up Designs. People think that, a lot of companies like that, just kind of stop. But we've been doing a lot of stuff. We've developed a lot of new products. And I've come with the motto, never let a good crisis go to waste. And we've definitely managed our time pretty well and came up with some interesting new products. And one of them was the KBP, which is the marimba pad, which is a dye sublimated life-size version of a marimba pad that you can find on Synced Up Designs, and it's printed on a neoprene pad, which is awesome. It rolls up and folds up. You can put it in a bag and whatnot. So we've been selling the living full out of those things, which has been great. Yeah, I've got a couple other projects that I've shared with you and Matt that I won't be able to really quite share until about 2 weeks from now. So everybody can know that like in 2 weeks from now, there's going to be something hitting that is going to be pretty awesome. That is
super
involves
cool.
The whole community.
Yep.
It's not just a me or Synced Up thing. It's something completely separate, and it's the whole community's involved with it. It's going to be really awesome. So
yeah, make sure you're hitting refresh on Shane's Facebook page so you stay up to date.
For sure, yeah, exactly.
So, all right, well, cool. Well, guys, this has been so much fun. And before we get out of here, I just want to say thank you to the circuits, ADLA, CWE, and SCGC for putting on this series of events. I'm so lucky to be able to have guys like Shane and Matt on here to learn about what they do and what makes them successful and figure out how we can apply that to our individual lives and what we do as music educators or designers. Next week for Workshop Wednesday, week 3, we are taking it to the West Coast. We're going to be having a conversation with Matt Hartwell and Steven Estudio. It's going to be a little bit more on the visual side of things because those guys are visual caption heads at Santa Clara Vanguard, program coordinators at the Pacific Crest. They both work as designers and caption heads at Pulse Percussion and some other groups out on the West Coast. So super pumped to talk to them and take it to the other side of the country and learn a little bit more about what they do. So make sure that you tune in for that. Go ahead and reserve your ticket on Eventbrite. That will be going live tomorrow morning at 7 a.m. Central Time. So get in there and get your ticket so that way you've got a spot. And yeah, if we don't have anything else, we'll go ahead and end it here and see you guys next week.
Thanks again,
guys.
y'all. Yep. It was fun.